Greetings everyone. If you are an Excel user and always wondered whether can I learn Excel VBA macros the way everybody has been learning the coding? Well, if you follow my approach, you can. In this video tutorial, I'll talk about how can you learn macros. What is a sequence of steps? I'll start with a quick brush up on how to record macros. Then I'll show you how without knowing coding, you can go to Google, find out relatable codes which are ready made, copy and paste that in the right window and make your automation easier. Along the way, we'll learn the theory as well. So I'll talk about object, property and methods. Next, I'll also talk about cell and range object, which is a very important concept in Excel VBA macros. So my job is to ensure if somebody wishes to learn Excel VBA macros, I should make the journey easier. So why wait? Let's start. Now people ask me why should they spend time and effort in learning something which will take some time. Well, let me show you some examples, and these examples are the ones which are going to help you streamline a lot of tasks in future if you are working with Excel or any data which is very large enough. Example number 1. Assume that you're working with different worksheets. It could be income statement, balance sheet, fund flow statement, cash flow statement, projections, or you might be working with different locational worksheets. In this case, as you can see at the bottom of my screen, Australia, India, South Africa, Sri Lanka, US, UK, China, workings 1, 2 and 3. Well, if you have to send this to somebody, it would be preferred that you create an index of sheet names, which if clicked upon should take you to the other worksheets as relevant. Now, if you had done this on your own, you would have had to copy this particular worksheet name, paste it in one of the cells, and then right click and then say, okay, let me go to hyperlink, and then you'd have to tell Excel that, look, I wish to go to a place in this document, and then which document, which sheet? Okay, this is the one which says Australia, right? Now, once I click on Australia, only then it takes me to the sheet called Australia. Well, can you imagine how much time would it take if you had to do this for almost a dozen worksheets? And not just that, in future, if any change happens in the structure of the workbook, the name of the worksheets, you would have to re-update this. Well, with macros, only a click of a button. And if the name changes, let's say I'm just making the Australia as AUS, the short form. Let me click on the button again. You notice how quickly it does your task. Well, this was just one example. Let me show you one more. Here before me, I have another workbook whereby sheet 1, 2, 3, 4 worksheets have different data. The sequence of data are same. That is the client name, country, city, location of the particular office and the amount. Now, these 4 sheets contain different names and numbers. Imagine if you had a dozen worksheets with data spanning over hundreds of rows and you had to combine them in one single sheet. What would you have done? Well, you would have copied this, go to sheet 1, paste it beneath, again go to sheet 3, copy this, alright, I can see that, and paste it below, right? If you had to do this a number of times in a month, in a week, this is unnecessarily spending and wasting time. It is not going to add any value to your knowledge base. Well, with macros, let's see how fast it can be done. So I go to developer tab, macros, and I click on this macro merge sheets and I simply run it. Look, something happened in the background. Let me see. There is a new worksheet that got created and that's the name combined. Well, this has combined all the data in what, 1 or 2 seconds at max. So this is what macros can do for you. And before I close this video, let me show you one more example, something which is based on user-defined function or a formula. Quite often people ask me that the invoice amount that they arrive at in a certain bill amount, I want to convert the number into text, something which says rupees 200,000 50.50 paise, right? So I have this user-defined function which I'll be talking about in the course of this entire program. Number 2 words. If I click on any one number and I close the bracket, enter, notice rupees 52,600 only. And if I had a paise, 0.2 and 20 paise. Now how cool is that? So you learn all this and much more in the videos to come, and I would want you to believe me and just stay all along throughout the end of the course. And trust me, this is going to be a lifelong investment that you will cherish till the end of your life. Now we'll learn how to activate the developer tab on your Excel screen's ribbon. You would notice that while working with Excel, I have been frequently using the developer tab. Well, most of you who would not have worked with Excel macros earlier would not find this on your screen. So I'll show you how to activate this in the version 2007 and the versions thereafter. So first in 2007, let me activate one window of 2007 version of Excel. So how do I know it's 2007? Well, the moment you see this office button, the one in circle in shape, that means it is 2007. So if you have this circle button on your screen, that means you're using 2007. And to activate the developer tab, you must click on the circle button once. Down below, you will notice Excel options. I would want you to click on that. And within that, the option of popular. Once you go inside popular, you will notice a third option from the top which says show developer tab in the ribbon. Well, once I click on it and I press OK, it will show me the developer tab. In 2010, 13 and 16 version of Excel, let's see how to activate this. We go to the file menu on the top left. Down below, you find options. I click on options. Within options, you will not find the popular tab as you had found this in 2007 version of Excel. Well, this time you will have to go to customize ribbon tab. Well, the logic is this entire section of Excel top hand screen is called ribbon and you wish to add one tab on it. Hence, you are going to tell customize ribbon. Within customize ribbon, you skip this one dialog box and go to the next one. You notice a list of all the tabs. Well, in my screen, the developer checkbox is ticked on. In your case, you will have to tick it on as well. And once you press OK, you will notice on the top right corner of the ribbon, you will find developer tab. So this was all about developer tab. Before we start working with macros, let's just go through some of the very basic important information because that will help us save our work correctly and execute our work correctly. Now what I notice on my screen, the one of the files which contains macro, the extension of the file name happens to be XLSM, not the XLSX that you have been working with regularly on a day-to-day basis. Why? If you happen to record or write a code in your file and wish to save this for future use, you must tell Excel that look, this has to be a macro enabled workbook and you must save it accordingly. Macros, if saved in the XLSX format, will not reactivate or re-execute or get saved for future after you have closed the files once. So if ever you are working with a macro, please ensure that you are saving this in XLSM. Now, it's not that difficult. Why? Because you can go to File, Save As, and when you go to Save As, now let's say I wish to save this on one of my modules. Let me go to one of the modules. And you will notice from the drop down, it gives you variety of options, one of which says macro enabled workbook. Now some of you may not get this extension listed out here because that's one of the folder options settings from the PC which I have activated. So it's quite useful to have those settings activated and I'll show you that. So I go to the window option. Window X is a shortcut which I'm pressing. It allows me to go to control panel. Either ways, you might access control panel from your PC. Once you activate control panel, one of the options you might get after you check on the small icon or the large icon is folder option. Let me go to folder option. Yep, as I press the letter F, it takes me to folder options. I go to folder options and then I go to the view tab. Within view tab, there is one setting, probably 7th or 8th, which says hide extensions for known file types. Now by default, it is switched on. If it is switched on, you will not be able to find the extension so easily listed out on the desktop or in the saving panel. Let me press OK and I cross this out. Let me now save this on the same folder. Let me see what do I get. Notice I don't get the extension of the file. I just get the macro enabled workbook. Well, I would prefer to have that extension shown to me. Hence, I'm going back to the control panel setting, go to the folder options, and I make sure that I go to view tab and check this box off which says hide extensions for known file type. I apply this and I press OK. So henceforth, we'll save all our work in the XLSM or a macro enabled workbook. Now, this time I'm going to talk about one of the security settings which is very important if you are working with macro. For example, if I'm going to open one of the XLSM file, the macro enabled file,
it has certainly one of the macros which we saw in one of the earlier videos. As I open this, notice I get a security warning which says macros have been disabled, and what would you like to do from here? Well, I'm going to say I'm going to enable the content, because if I don't, it will not allow me to run the macros and work with the macros. Now, majority of you would get that setting, and that setting is residing in one of the developer tab security settings. Let me show you where. I go to developer, I go to macro security button on the left hand side, I click on it, and once I click on it, I get 4 options. These 4 options are the same in all the versions of Excel 2007, 10, 13 and so on. What it says, currently it says disable all macros with notification, which means if any user opens a file which has a macro, it will by default disable the working, but along with it, it will give a notification which allows the user to activate that. And this is exactly what we saw a few seconds back. Well, since I know that I'm going to work with macros very often, I do check this setting on enable all macros, although not recommended. Why? Because you might get some code from other users or the internet, and by default, if it is run on PC through the Excel macros, it might damage your PC. Why? Because somebody might just code some erroneous code or maybe have some malified intentions. Now, of course, I'll be being very careful while I'm writing macro, and that is the reason for our purposes I am enabling all macro and pressing OK, so that next time I open the file, I will not get that particular warning. See, I reopen the file, no warnings. So that was one of the settings of security while working with macros. So by default, either you choose the second one which says disable all macro with notification, or you may say enable all macros. That will not ask you any question regarding running of macros. Now that we have seen some of the important settings of security and how to activate the developer tabs in various versions of Excel, let me just quickly help you walk through what's inside the developer tab. Well, please do not get overwhelmed by the different buttons that are placed on this panel. As of now, to begin with, we're going to only focus on this one section of developer tab which says code, Visual Basic, macro, record macro, macro security, and we will also focus on only one subsection of this insert button, which will allow me to draw a button which, if clicked upon, will activate certain macro. So I can associate that button with the macro, so that next time if I click on that particular button, that macro is run. Right. So as of now, please ignore all the tabs and options inside the developer tab. We'll be discussing that later as and when the relevance is felt. Now, let me pick up one of the most important questions before we proceed. That is, how should you start learning this macro? Well, if you go by the traditional approach of chapter 1, 2, 3 and 4, going by a certain textbook, you will fall out midway. Why? Imagine if I just continue to discuss theory for the next 30, 60 odd minutes, you would get bored, because it doesn't lead you to an actionable result. And that is why I see people dropping midway while starting to learn with macros. This is not what I'm going to let happen. I will adopt an approach which is much more faster in learning, because I don't go by the theory and then practical. I go with practical, theory and so on and so forth. So let's see how this path leads us to the right direction. Well, this time let me show you. If I open one of the XLSM file, how do I get to see the code? I may not have written the code, but I downloaded the file from the internet and I wish to see the code. I go to developer and I go to the second button which is called macros. So you notice on my screen there's a shortcut key for that as well. So eventually, as we get more comfortable, I will be using the shortcut key Alt F8 to activate that. Once I click on this, notice I get one name, and that's called merge sheets. Now it's supposedly a macro. I don't wish to run this right now, but I wish to edit this. Although I may not edit, but at least I'll be taken to a panel where the codes are mentioned. First things first, don't even start reading the codes. No, it will give you a headache. What I want you to read is just the first line and the last line of the code. Temporarily, I'm just cutting the entire thing out. Notice what? On my screen, you see sub, name of the macro, followed by a pair of parentheses, and the end sub. Well, in my discussion, I'll be referring this as head and tail of a macro. Whenever you scroll through any book or internet or a blog and you come across this pair, sub and end sub, please assume that it is a macro code that is there. Now there are two types of macro in general. One which performs a certain action. Action could be that it deletes all the worksheets, or it creates a link of all the worksheet names, or it could be a user defined function. Now what is a user defined function? If you apply a formula called VLOOKUP, this is a system defined function whereby the system already has the codes written for VLOOKUP and accepting various arguments. Sometimes a user may wish to create his own function which is not there in Excel, and that is made to perform certain calculations. So that is called a user defined function, in short also called UDF. If you Google around UDF, you'll find a lot of text on that. Now how does that UDF look like? I'll go to macros again. One thing is for sure, it doesn't get listed in the list of macro button. I'll have to go to edit, and notice below this first macro there is a line. Why is there a line? Because you said end sub, that's the end of a macro, tail of a macro. And after that there are some comments marked in green, and the starting point is function, name of the function, and then after certain line items, just ignore these intermittent text for now, notice there's an end function. So just like sub and end sub in general, which is the head and tail of a macro, for UDF, for user defined function, it is function and thereafter end function. Now why am I discussing this right now? Why? Because I want from here on every macro that we look at, we must classify them in the normal action taking macro and user defined function. That's the head and the tail of a macro. Now in this session I'll show you how to associate a macro with a button which can be clicked upon, and the entire series of macro can be run based on that. So we had seen in one of the earlier videos, there is a macro, sample macros, the codes of which I have not discussed so far. But if I click on that particular button, it simply creates the names of all the worksheets and drops an hyperlink to each one of them. So let me show you how to create this button and associate a macro with it. I go to developer tab. In that you notice an insert option. Now this is not the same insert tab we happen to use very frequently for pivot table and charts. We'll go to developer and then go to insert tab. For the time being, ignore the remaining ActiveX controls and other form control button. Just focus on the first button of form controls, which happens to be the simple button of form control. I click on it. You notice the cursor sign, it's changing, and it allows me to draw one button. As soon as I release the cursor, it immediately asks me what is the macro you want to assign to this button, so that when a user clicks upon it, it activates and runs the macro. I press OK. I'm going to click on this text area and change the heading so that it's more indicative of the task that it is trying to do. So update table of contents. I click outside to make the button go live, and once I do that, let me test this. I click on this button. Yes, it does happen. In fact, if you wish to delete this button, you will simply right click and say cut. That's all. So we saw how to associate a button, a click me button, with a macro. Now this time let me show you how to start working with macros through a procedure called record macros. We'll be getting inside coding very soon, but what I want us to do is first see how a basic recording macro is done, how to run that macro. Secondly, at times you may not know how to code a certain task, then we will use some common basic sense and technique and use Google's power, sift through various Google search results and see how can we take some macro and put it to our daily use. And then finally we'll start with the normal coding process. Remember, I had mentioned that if you go by chapter 1, 2, 3, 4 approach, you are going to find macros very boring. So what I've done is I have tried to inbuild as much action as possible up front so that we can see actionable result. And with this, let me give an example. In this example, I have 3 alphanumeric number on the left hand side and the same thing on the right hand side. Well, typically if you wish to delete all the numeric data from this information so that what you're left with is just this, what would you do? You would perhaps use Control H. You would say what? Find what? 0, and then say, well, let me take digit 1 because I can see some of the digits 1. So find what? 1, replace all amongst the chosen data, right? And with this, you will follow with all the subsequent numbers, 2 and then 3 and then 4, right? Well, I want that this entire action, this entire procedure should be recorded by Excel so that later when I require the same action to be undertaken, it just runs that in a click of a button. Let's see how to do that. First, I choose at least 2 cells. Why do I say so? Because if you simply select one cell and use Control H, it will replace the digit 4 or 1 throughout the worksheet. I don't want that to happen. So what I'll do is, I'll choose at least 2 cells if not more, and then I go to developer. I'm going to click on this button called record macro. What it does, once I start recording a macro, it will record every step. Now, it's not a video based recording, nor it is a time based recording. It's an action based recording. So every click, every action, every text that you write in Excel or any cell or any worksheet, it will capture that and put that in the VBA code. We'll see how very soon. So in here I'm going to go to record macro. Alright, let me type in a name which I can remember easily, test, and purposely I'm giving a space and then writing 1. Why? I'll tell you. If I press OK right now, it tells me that the name you entered is not valid. Now why so? Because I have entered a space. So the name of the macro does not include any space, it should be continuous, test 1. I can provide a shortcut key even later, I'm ignoring that for now, and store macro in this workbook. I do not wish to store this in a personal macro workbook because this is computer specific. I cannot transfer this macro to my colleague unless I know the intricacies of coding and the Visual Basic window. For the time being, I'm going to store this in this workbook so that as soon as I transfer this workbook to anybody, he or she can also apply the macro. I'll discuss on this more later. I'm going to press OK, but notice as soon as I press OK, this button's name will change. I press OK. Notice stop recording has started. Now I am straight away pressing Control H, H for harmony, and I'm saying find what? Digit 4. OK, and I'm going to click on replace all. All done. We made 2 replacements, fine with me. OK, and then I'm going to click on stop recording. So between the event of start and stop recording, what exactly did I do? I pressed Control H, H for harmony to activate find and replace, and simply deleted the digit 4. Now let me do one thing. Let me again go back to record macro and then say this is test 2. Okay, test 2, fine. Then if I select these cells, my action of selecting the cells is also getting recorded. So see the difference. Let me continue. Control H, this time find what? Let's say digit 3 and replace all. Okay, close, stop the recording. If I choose, let's say this cell, and then go to macros and I say test 2, run, what happens? It quickly goes back to the old 2 cells, the same range, and thus perform the same procedure. Whereas if I choose the cells again, A5 to A7, let's say, or maybe even more, and then I go to macros and run the test 1, not test 2, test 1, notice what happens? Yes, the number has been deleted based on the selection. So selection action sequence is also very important while recording the macro, whereby I had recorded 2 macros, one whereby I selected the cells first, then went to record macro, and then using Control H, that is find and replace, deleted 1 digit. In this next macro, test 2, I had first selected record macro and then chosen the range of cells and then applied the recording of macro. Now we'll see the codes in here. As of now, what I will do is go to developer, go to macros, I find test 1 and test 2, right? Now I don't wish to run this time, I wish to see the macro, I wish to edit the macro if need be. So I go to test 1 and I click on edit. Now let me go to the other window. I'll talk about this entire panels of window in the next video, but as of now what I can see is, remember head and tail of a macro? I'm going to refer this head and tail quite often. So sub and end sub, which means this is the one macro, another sub and end sub pair means another macro. Now the first macro and the second macro, spot the difference. Apart from the digit, spot the difference. You'll find this line item is extra in the second macro. Now why is that? Because I had categorically first started to record the macro, then chose the cell A3 to A4. So my action of selecting those 2 cells has already been recorded. What thereafter? Well, the action sequence says amongst the selection, please replace 3 with what? Nothing. And it also gives some attributes regarding the case and the format, etc. in the find and replace code. Now, what would happen if I were to delete this 4 and give letter A instead? Will the action change when I run the macro? Let me find out. One way to find out is I minimize this window and I may run the code starting from test 1, or else I can go to macro and find test 1 and then run it. Notice the letter K has been removed. So what we did right now is the very basic editing of a certain macro. I go to macro and I click on test 1 or test 2 and I say edit, and then I can proceed with editing the macro. Now, well, notice currently the macros which I have recorded are residing under macros tabs, test 1, test 2, and at the same time the file is XLSX. Now, how is that possible? Well, if I try to press Ctrl S, try to save it, notice it gives me a window which says the following features cannot be saved in macro free workbook. If you wish to save this as a macro free workbook, click yes. If you click yes and close the file, you lose all the macro. So what I'll do is, we'll click no and then follow the recommendation of Excel which says please change the file type, which I'm going to change to macro enabled workbook, and safely I can say save. This ensures in future if ever close the file and reopen the file, the macros are still going to be there. So do ensure that you do that while working with macros. Now we will see how to use the panels of the Visual Basic window to be able to test the macro better, maybe make additions and see how more can we use the functionality. So I will ask you to go to developer, in that file of the macro which you have recorded, going to macros, and either one of them I'm going to click on edit. And once I do that, some of you would get this window either docked fully or maybe partially on your screen. It says Microsoft Visual Basic for application. Now why is it called so? Typically this is a language Visual Basic which has been written for an Excel application. Hence it is called Microsoft Visual Basic for applications. What applications? It can be Word, it can be Excel, it can be PowerPoint. So hence in short we say it is VBA. Now what you also notice is some of you, as you see the screen, the codes are present. So on the left hand side I also have something called Project Explorer. Some of you might not see this, some of you might not see this, you might see just this. So first I'll show you how to activate the Project Explorer and what does it mean, what relevance does it hold. So I go to View. You notice the shortcut key for Project Explorer, it's given by Ctrl R, R for Rishabh. I click on Project Explorer. Now how is this supposed to be read? Every Excel file that is open will be listed out here, and it is a part of a VBA project. There's also a personal macro workbook which is open in the background, and that's called personal.xlsb. It's in one of the system folders of Microsoft Windows Excel program files. Now within this, notice how the things have been organized. If you have 10 worksheets in the file, it will be listed as sheet 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are names such as modules. It's a part of the VBA project. What is the project? The entire file. Now these modules are nothing but the container of the macros code. So this, what you see before your screen, is a code and has been stored in the module. Module of which file? Module of this file. If you wish to create another module, just for simplicity and keeping the codes organized, you might select this particular project. You might say insert and module. And what it does, it gives you another container whereby if you write a very basic head, sub test 3, open bracket, close bracket, enter, notice it creates another basic macro, although it doesn't do anything, but that's stored in module 2. So this is how the hierarchy of the structure of the file moves. It has the worksheet, it has the module, and if we go ahead and get more advanced level, we'll notice we can also insert class, module, and user form. Of course, that is something I'll be taking up later. So let me close all the other window and just show you from scratch. View, Project Explorer, and View, Properties window. This talks about each worksheet's property. Again, this will be taken up a little later, and by this we understand the basic hierarchy in which the things are stored. Now let's learn the difference between personal macro workbook and this workbook. Now, where is this term used and where would you find this? Well, if you would have experimented with the record macro button, you would have seen that while initiating the record macro, it will ask you where do you want to store the macro in. One of the option would be saying this workbook, and one of the other option will be saying personal macro workbook. Well, this workbook is the active workbook on which I'm working. So personal macro workbook, and I can send this to my colleague if I want to. Versus there's a personal macro workbook. This is a file which is residing in one of the systems folder, and it opens with any instance of Excel. So even if you're not opening any file and just opening a plain and simple Excel, this personal macro workbook opens up in the background and you don't notice it until you go to Visual Basic. And in that Visual Basic notice, I have a personal macro workbook, which is the active workbook I'm working on. And there's another project which I can see, and that is called personal.xlsb. Now, there could be a lot of modules in that particular personal macro workbook. The advantage is, since it opens every time you open Excel, there are certain macros which you would want to use in any Excel file, and you do not want to copy the code in every individual Excel file. So how can you make use of this? Well, let me show you an example. Let's suppose that you wish you had a macro, and what does it do? It's going to make sure all the font is, let's say, Times New Roman. They follow a standard size of 10, and there are no grid lines. So simply put, let me first activate grid lines. And now I'm going to do developer, go to record macro, macro 2. Let me store that in personal macro workbook. Okay. I choose the entire sheet. I go to home. I turn the font to, let's say, Times New Roman. Enter. I change the font to 10. And I go to view and I disable the grid lines. So this is a standard procedure that I perform for all new files, and I would want to capture this as a part of macro, which I did. And the best part is, anytime I open a new file, I can work with this macro. So let me stop recording. Let me close this file. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to open a new instance of Excel. So maybe I'm writing my name here, maybe the city that I reside in, and when I go to developer, I go to macro. Notice it says personal XLSB macro 2. If I run it, it chooses the entire sheet, makes the font size 10 Times New Roman, and no grid lines. So this way you can put the frequently used macro in the personal macro workbook. Now, where would you find this Excel file which is opening up in the background? Let me open up those. The path is generally in the later versions of Windows, C drive, user, Excel next, that's the name of the user. So most likely it's supposed to be your name. App data, now this is a hidden folder. If you go to this path, you may not find app data because the folder may be hidden, in which case, let me quickly show you how to unhide that folder. I'm going to control panel, I am going to folder options, and within folder options, I go to view, and one of the options says, please show hidden files, folders, and drive. In most cases, the first option is chosen. I ask you to choose the second option temporarily. Apply. Okay. And once I do that, let me just copy this particular path till this point. I go to my Windows environment. In fact, it's already open there. You notice the path is the same as mentioned in the Excel file, and this harbors the personal.xlsb file. So if you follow this path after unhiding all the hidden folders, you'll be able to see this particular file, and this is what contains the macro. So that's the basic difference between personal macro workbook and this workbook. People prefer to use this workbook for majority of the reason. Why? Because they would want whatever macro has been recorded, they are able to share it with their colleagues over the email. So if you send this file right now, the personal macro workbook XLSM, the colleague will not be able to see the macro. Why? Because it has been saved in the personal macro workbook. So if you want to share the work, please save it in this workbook. Else, if you just want to use it for your own utility, every time you work with Excel, you save the macro in personal macro workbook. Now, let's see some of the popular ways with which a macro is executed is run. Now, I've already recorded a macro using the record button, and that ensures whenever I run this, the entire font of the sheet is turned into that of Times New Roman and the size is 10. Now I can go to macros button and simply click on run. Notice the execution. So this is the way with which it is run using macros button. Similarly, I can assign a shortcut key to a macro. So when I go to macro again, this particular work start macro, I'm going to go to options button and it asks me, do you want to give a shortcut key? I say, let me give O. Do remember that whatever shortcut key that you give here, it will supersede the existing default shortcut key. So for example, if you give P, it will supersede the printing shortcut key, and same goes for S for save. So I'm using a very uncommon letter, Control O, and I press OK, and then let me cancel it. Let me first make sure the font is not Times New Roman, something like stencil. Now I'm going to press Control digit O. Notice it's been run. So this is another way of running the macro. Apart from this, I could have gone to Developer, Visual Basic window. So in the Visual Basic editor, when I put the cursor before the beginning of the macro, I can hit on this run subroutine button, for which there's also a shortcut key, as you can see, called F5. If I click on it, boom, the entire macro is run and all the fonts have been converted to Times New Roman. So this is another way. Let me just press Ctrl Z. I had accidentally pressed Ctrl V. Next, I could also possibly assign a click me button, format control, or as we will see later, we can also assign a command button. As of now, I'm just using form controls, basic button. And as soon as I finish drawing that button, it asks me what macro do I want to associate it with. I choose this macro and I press OK. If I want, I can write a different heading, something like click here and delete the rest. And I click outside. So let's see how we run this particular macro. First, let me make sure the font is changed to something else, anything. And then let me click on this button. Ooh, the macro being run. So this is another way of running the macro. I know it'll take some time for you to go to a stage where you yourself can start coding extensively and perform a lot of tasks which otherwise will take a lot of time to do that manually. But at this stage where we are just beginning to get into the coding part, let me show you one trick which involves little coding, yet at the same time will give you immense benefit. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to combine the power of Google search with a certain common sense technique and a specific technique how to copy the code in the Google page or any of the blog post and paste it in a certain section of Excel and benefit out of the code. So take an example. Let's say we have a set of worksheets which talks about the different countries, different cities perhaps, and they are all locations, and also additionally I have a couple of sheets called working 1, 2 and 3. Now what I wish to do is, of all the worksheets, I want to create an index of names of the worksheets for an easy display of the content for the end user, and all these sheet names, once they are listed, should be linked to the respective worksheets so that when somebody clicks on it, it is taken to that worksheet. Maybe I don't know how to code it. Well, I at least know my question. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go to Google and I am going to type in my task. What is my task? The task could be, I wish to create an index of hyperlinked worksheet names or index of links to worksheets. We will try to become as specific as possible, but do note that please start your search with these 3 words: VBA code 2. VBA code 2. Now what I found is, people do search through internet for getting the codes, but they don't add these 3 important words which are VBA code 2. If you do add these 3 important magic words VBA code 2 before any task that you wish to accomplish, your search results will be very specific and accurate. So now let me proceed. VBA code 2, put a verb which signifies what you wish to do, and as soon as I write VBA code 2 create, it gives me certain hints, recommendations. You may get the same recommendations, maybe different. This depends on the Google rankings and the search results. But based on that, let me proceed. Create index. Okay, I'm getting something called index of links to worksheets. Let me click on it. And as the search results come up, I start reading the headings of the search result. One of it says create links to all sheets in a workbook, create a sheet index of Excel worksheets. Both look same, although the wordings are different. Create an index page or table of content. Now, since you gave the term VBA code to, it is leading you to accurate results, which might be a forum, which might be a blog post by different authors. And since somebody have asked this question in the past, they have answered it out of their time. And why then we have to reinvent the wheel? Why do we need to recode it if the code is certainly available on the internet? Well, let me do one thing. Let me go to create links to all sheets, the first one. And as this page opens, I use this page quite often for reference. It's good website, get digital help. Once this page loads up, I see a blog which says the macro demonstrated below create hyperlinks to all sheets in current workbook. Oh, they will let the pop-up be closed. Yeah. And I proceed ahead and it says VBA code. Now, even if they didn't say VBA code, you notice from our earlier learnings, the head and tail of a macro. Well, this is the head and this is the tail. That's exactly how I spot a macro, even if though it doesn't look differently. Now, if you're using Chrome, which I will strongly recommend, you'll notice on the top right hand side panel, you may get this tag sign which says view source. I will click on it and it opens a window and I need to copy this from head till tail of the macro. If you're copying from the window, sometimes what happens, you try to copy this, but it also copies the numbers. No, I don't need to copy the numbers. So you use a technique which allows you to copy only the code part, not the numbers. So it depends on the website. Sometimes you can simply select this and get rid of the 1 to 11 digits. Sometimes you get this view source. Either ways, we'll copy from head to tail. Copy that. And then, how do I use this? I go to Excel. I go to developer. Now this I'm not recording a macro. Why? Because already a user has written that macro for me. So I'm going to go to macros. I see an empty window. Okay. Let me write a dummy name. Let's say XYZ. Okay. Even a single letter will do for that matter. X. Now as soon as I press X in the macro name, X will tell me there is no such macro and hence it has activated the button called create. Okay, fine. Let me go to create. What it does is, if I look at the project explorer, it takes me right to the workbook which is open, and in there's a module which automatically it has created. Additionally, in the code panel which I see right now before me, there's a dummy macro. Dummy macro means there's a head and there's a tail, there's no action in between. Now how do you paste the macro? Certainly not pasting in between a head and tail. You cannot have two heads and two tails here. This is completely erroneous. So either you delete this current existing one and then paste it, or you might paste below it, which is also fine. You notice a line has been drawn to demarcate the difference. Either ways, it should not be between a macro. Let me delete this dummy macro. And the name of the macro, it says sub create links to all sheets. Fine. I'm just quickly sifting through the various codes, although it doesn't make sense to a user like me right now if I'm learning the macros. Well, I'll discuss this a little later. At this moment, I just wish to see that if I'm able to get hold of a code on the internet and I'm able to copy and paste at the right location of the VBA code, how do I run and benefit out of it? I go to any cell, I then go to the macros. Now since you had deleted the dummy macro and you had inserted a new code, the name of the new code being create links to all sheets. Alright, let me keep my fingers crossed and run it. Notice it does exactly what it is meant for. It is creating an index of links to all the worksheet. Did you know how to code? Perhaps not. Does that stop you from benefiting out of VBA code? No. What are the common sense needed? Well, define your task. What is it that you want to achieve? The keywords should be relating to Excel's words. So when you refer to workbook, it means the workbook of Excel. Do not use file in that case. Use worksheets, use hyperlinks, use cells. These are all the technical terms that you might use. And do what thereafter? You combine that search task with the three magic words, which is VBA code 2. Now you'll get through various search results on the internet, and if you're using these three magic words, most likely you're going to get more accurate results than not. And use that code, copy that code, go to macros, write a dummy name A, instantly what you get is create, and once you create, you might paste that code in here below or maybe above, but never in between a head and tail of another macro. Well, in this, I'm going to ask you to add the power of some common sense of code editing and recording of macro so that the entire Google search result which was giving you a certain code can be customized to your task. For example, in the last video, we went to the Google and searched for a code with respect to adding hyperlinked sheet names, and we got hold of a code which looked like this, sub create links. Well, when I run this code, the problem is it runs from the active cell, right? What I want to do is, whenever I run this code, it should start from the cell A2, correct? And maybe if need be, we also need to add a button which when clicked upon does the same task. So let me do one thing, let me delete this and then perhaps write a code which will make sure every time A2 cell is selected and then the macro code is run. Now you might tell me, look, I don't know how to code so far, so how do I then use the basic common sense to add that one line or two lines of codes which make sure A2 is selected? Well, you don't need to at this point in time. Let's see. I go to developer, then I go to record macro, and then I say test 1. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm simply selecting cell A2. That is my action, and immediately I stop recording. So between start and stop recording, what is the action that has been taken? Well, it is just the selection of one cell. Now, why is this important? Why? We'll see. When I go to macros to see whether test 1 has been recorded correctly, I find that name and I'm going to edit that. Notice in the sub test 1 till the end, I see some comments which is harmless if I delete them. But what I see is one line item which says range A2.select. Now, we'll be getting into the code very soon in details, right from the very level of object level coding, what are the properties, attributes. But at this moment, you can really relate the cause and effect. The cause of this code was you had selected the cell. The effect, as you can see, is range A2.select. Now, using a basic common sense, what I might want to do is combine this code line with the previous big macro that allows me to create hyperlink sheets. Well, I'm going to copy this, simple copy. Now, do I paste it above the head? No. Do I paste below the tail? No. I will be pasting within the code. Now, without knowing much in detail, how do I know which place or location do I paste the code in? Well, we start looking for ideas. We'll start looking for hints. The hints of this code tell me that there's some kind of a code which tell me for each worksheet do this about hyperlinked worksheets. Well, that's my action. Why not before the action, please add some spaces and then paste that code, right? Do I need the remaining set of codes of macros or procedures? No, I'm going to delete that. Now what I have is the name of the macro, same old macro, create links to all sheets, and within that one action which is saying A2, please go ahead and select it. Okay, let me test this macro. What I might do is, although I'll be getting into the correct way of testing the code little later when we start writing the code, at this moment I'm going to close this window of Visual Basic Editor and let me go to macros and run this macro. Notice it selects A2. Even if my cursor is on the cell E2 and go to macros and I run the macros, it runs from A2 onwards. Finally, just to add a little bit of garnish to my recipe, I'm going to go to insert, form control button, something that we have seen earlier, create one simple button and relate the button to a macro. Sometimes people miss relating this macro, so you must choose that categorically. Okay. And perhaps if need be, you might give a simple heading which might tell you update TOC, table of contents, and click outside. Let's say if I'm just changing the name of a sheet to SA, the initial, and let me go to the button update. Notice third one changing to SA, which if I click upon will take me to the sheet called SA. So that was about using Google's power with a little bit of common sense and recording of macros to modify the code to your taste. We'll see more of it as we progress. Now, how your preliminary knowledge of VBA code so far combined with the Google technique of searching for codes can get us a very good results in this example. Now, this example pertains to a fact where I have 5 names and there are certain values in the associated column. Now, what does these value indicate? This was based on a query which was asked to me by one of my program's participant back in 2013 or 14. And the problem involved a task. The task was based on the value, a row needs to be added up. So if the value says 2, that means there should be total 2 rows, in which perhaps I want to mention something below that. So the case where I have 1, that means I already have 1 row, no further extra row needs to be added. What about the value C? Well, in this case, extra 4 row needs to be added up. So I'm pressing F4 function key. Oops. Pressing F4 function key allows me to repeat my last action, and notice I'm able to add 4 more columns. And notice that I've been able to add 4 more rows. Now, imagine if the values are not just 5 or 6, 5 in this case, but they could stretch up to 1000 or maybe 10,000. How in that case do I add rows based on the cell's value? Of course, not manually. You'll be spending the entire week and still you may not be sure that everything is correct. What we'll take the help of is the special search of Google. So I'll ask all of you again to go to the window of Google and then type in those 3 magic words which we have discussed earlier, VBA code 2, and then specify your task. What is that you wish to achieve? VBA code 2, insert rows based on what? Based on cell values, right? So I'm going to put in insert. Please note that I avoid using the word add. Although it's not incorrect, but I will perform those such keywords which are more closely associated with the Excel's working. So insert row, delete row, these are the more technical terms. So insert, I get insert, definitely insert rows. Aha, Google already gives me some such recommendations. I use that. Now I'm looking at various websites. Most of these are very popular based on the user requests. The users put in a lot of their answers on board for others' help. So it says insert row based on cell value. Looks like something that I need. Insert row below based on cell value. This also looks similar. How to auto insert row based on cell value. So all these search results, one of them could be of your help. So I go to one of the first search results, click on that. It's osgrade.com. Now this time, I am not getting a blog post. I am instead getting a forum where users have put in the request that they need a code for some task. Now what happens in these blogs, a lot of users give their answer. How do you know which answer will match to your task? Well, I use a simple technique. Typically, if you give some answer and it is accepted and successful, then people thank initial coder, right? Now I'll look for those comments which says thank you so much, this code worked. Okay, I'm just scrolling this down. Alright, I come to a comment which says woohoo, the forum rocks. I knew there had to be a simpler way to do the same thing and blah blah blah. Well, then that means the code immediately prior to that could be the one that I'm looking for. Alright, now when I look at this code, what do you notice? The head and the tail? The head and the tail of a macro? Well, that is what I'm going to copy. Now, you might ask me, look, what if I copy some erroneous code which can be prepared with malicious intent, deleting some files? Well, one key is to look at the circumstantial evidence of the user's responses in the forum. One, it's a very renowned forum. Secondly, users have thanked this user who have given this code. So I'm going to copy this. I am going to go to the Excel file. Let me open the 2013 version of Excel, which is what we are working on right now. And how do you paste the code? Well, go to developer, go to macro, simply type in a word A and create. Now it directly takes you to the dummy shell that it has created. Do you need this? Of course not, because the copied code already had the head and tail. The code name is what? Try this. So sub procedure, try this. And I'm just looking at a basic flow of the code which has been written. To the new user, it might not make any sense, but you can catch up those keywords which are very common. So maybe there's some loop which says n greater than 0, then insert and current cell. We'll see all of this little later. My intention is to get you a hang of the way Google can be used to look for codes and you start working on it immediately. Now, logically the code did not speak about any particular cell where you might start, right? You don't find something called A2, A3, A4 or B1. So what I do, I place my cursor on this value, first value, and I go to macro. The name of the macro was try this. I'm not changing the name. And run. Okay, I have one row added, none here, 4 more, 3 here, and of course 2 new here. Imagine the reaction of the user who had initially asked this question to add rows based on 10,000 value. He would have been lost had he not applied this particular code. So my entire idea is, before we jump into coding, you can start benefiting out of this VBA code just by using my technique of going through VBA code 2, typing in the task that you wish to achieve in Google, get the code, identify the head and the tail of a code, copy that and paste it in the right module, and then at least try whether it works. And eventually we'll see how can we customize this further to suit our requirement. Now, you might get confused with object properties methods initially, but this example will make this more clear. Take for example, you want an iPhone with you, right? So you have specified the object that the iPhone is the thing that you would want. Now, of course, you would want to get more specific, right? What version? So there is a property which gets attached to that particular iPhone. So iPhone.property, that's the version. Now you need to give a value to that version, whether it's the iPhone 5 or 4 or 6 that you would want to go for based on your budget. So iPhone.version equal to 6, and that is what you're assigning a value to the property. Now after this, you want to initiate an action of doing thing which says iPhone.buy. So this is a method that you are attaching to that particular iPhone. Now beyond this, you would also want to be more specific in terms of the different parameters that are attached to this method, which says iPhone.buy. How would you want to buy this? Through the payment type cash or credit card. Now you can add more parameters depending on the availability of a particular parameters against a particular object or a method. So iPhone.buy, payment type is cash, you want a discount, no delivery charge, and all this all gets combined in one single line. Now similar to this is how a particular code is written, where you might choose a particular range of cells. You want to specify that what you wish to do with it. Now similar to this is what we see something in the coding window itself. So if I click on this grouping part, you notice active cell.font. So amongst the active cell, the one that has been chosen, the font property, what would the name that you would like it to be? Well, I'm going to assign a value which is Calibri. I may also given a value which might say true for a particular property being bold. So these are the ways I can select a particular object, define a property, and later as we proceed, we'll also apply methods to the different cells to manipulate them, maybe copy and paste to a different sheet, and that's how we accomplish a lot of tasks through automation in VBA. Now with VBA, especially for Excel, things are so intertwined that you cannot move in a very sequential chapter 1, 2, 3 and 4 format. For example, in the couple of recent videos where we were talking about the way the work area must be set, what are the different components, I was frequently using the words methods, properties, objects. So let me now tell you in brief what do these terms mean. Imagine a house. Now that is an object. Within a house, you would find various components like doors, windows, maybe furniture, right? So those are what? Those are child objects. So there's an object house. There are child objects like doors, windows and furniture. Now with each of these objects, they have properties defined. Now door could be what? Teakwood door. It could be big door, small door. Now each of these child objects will also have methods attached to it. For example, what do you want to do with the door? Either open or close it, right? So that's an action associated with a certain object. So either you can paint the door red or maybe blue. Now that is an action being performed with a certain defined property, right? So it's a method that is we are associating with a child object, which is a door, and the property of the paint color is what? Red or green. Now exactly in the same manner, worksheet is an object. There are child objects within which contain what? Range of cells. Each cell has certain property in terms of the fill color, in terms of the column width, in terms of the cell size, and what is it that you wish to do with those cell. You may want to increase the size of the cell, may want to turn into a color green, right? So those are the action associated with it. So with these basic fundamentals, we are going to move along and see how all this fit together in our terminologies while we start coding. Now, since we are all set to start the coding process, let me make sure that the work area is very well known to you. The work area where we will be starting to code. Now, if I go to developer and if I go to Visual Basic button, let me click on it. And alternately, I can press the shortcut key Alt F11 to access that. Let me click on it. Now, what you see is a variety of windows which will help you do some specific tasks, view the entire project overview. So let me do one thing, let me close all of them. And then I'll start afresh. The first thing that I would want on my screen of the Visual Basic window is, I must say, please let me view the Project Explorer. Now, what is Project Explorer? As we just briefly touched upon this topic earlier, this is basically showing you an overview of all open files, the worksheet names inside them, and any module which has been created to store any macro. Once I click on a module, I can double click on it to show the view code window, and this code let me see the entire story that's trying to do. So now when I look at the code, as we already know, this is the head, this is the tail, but let me now get deeper inside the color coding aspect. Now, blue are the text which are specific VBA words reserved for certain tasks. The black are the ones which are going to be tested during the execution process and has been mentioned by the user. Now you also notice something which is mentioned in green. Now what is this green part? This is a comment. Quite often it might happen that you have written a code and you wish to keep it but not get it executed. So rather than completely deleting it from the code window, I might as well commentify. Now how do I commentify? Either manually I might put a single code before every line item, but as you can see that's a very tedious task. Alternatively, what I might do is select the entire group of text which I want to commentify. Now since I've already commentified, what I'm going to do is uncomment the block, and there's a button called comment the block. Now you might not see this toolbar on your screen, and to activate this, what needs to be done? So I go to view, I go to toolbar, and then there is an option which says edit. If it is turned off, you will not find that toolbar. So make sure you have the toolbar by going to view tab and going to toolbars and clicking on edit one. And once I have tested the code and I wish to go back and make sure this is the comment which has been removed and convert into an actual code, I might simply say uncomment. So this was one of the series of knowing your workspace. By the way, why is it looking red? Because there is no command which says loop for all worksheet. From our initial example, this was supposed to be commented. Now, let's see what else can we do with the edit toolbar on the top right of this code window, which we saw how to activate. Now, within this, apart from the comment and uncomment block, the next thing is you can use a certain button which is called increase and decrease indent to make sure you have the effect of tab key and shift tab key to make it go back to the original stance. Apart from that, sometimes it happens that in the same file, in the same project, you might have inserted another module and you're working with another module. So let's say I'm just giving sub test 5, enter. Now what happens is I wish to toggle to different points of code from different modules. So what I do is I go to module 1. I perhaps want to keep a track of this particular line item of code, and I may have to toggle back and forth. So what I do is I select this particular line item. I then make a bookmark. Now, since it was the first time a bookmark has been created, you notice the blue squarish, almost rectangle looking like box appearing here. Now let me go to module 2, and then if I say, please help me toggle to the next previous bookmark or next bookmark, let me click on it. What does it do? It takes me instantly to that part of the code. Now this is useful generally in cases where you are going to write long list of codes, and it's very easy to get lost amongst the codes that you have written in different modules. So you want to create place marks, bookmarks, or traces that can help you move back and forth between those important lines of codes. So this was about indent, decrease indent, and about the bookmark. Now, assume that I'm going to write a code which starts from RANG. Now, I wish to complete this entire word. So what I might do is I might go to this button which says complete the word. Now, notice there's a shortcut key associated with it, control space. So if I press control space, notice it completes the range object. Now, I would want to know what are the different objects, properties, methods associated with it. So I will go to this button which says list properties and methods. Again, notice as usual there's a shortcut key associated with it. So I'm going to press Ctrl J and it gives me a drop down where you see an object, various properties and methods, and the whole list of drop down where you can pick and choose. So let's say I have selected dot select. That's one of the methods, select. Now, what I wish to do is I wish to find out if there are any parameter associated with this particular method. So what I do is I go to quick info and it shows me a small parameter group. Now what would have happened had I chosen just the range object method property, something that I'm going to discuss very soon in some time. Notice I quickly click on quick info and I get the all properties of the range object. So the couple of shortcut keys that's going to help you along the path is Ctrl J, Ctrl I and Control space. Now there are many more other shortcut keys which I will discuss as and when the relevance arises. As of now, even if you are not able to remember the shortcut key, that's fine. What we'll be doing is, this is just an overview and eventually we'll be making use of them, and that's the point where we will start learning them and remembering them. Now, as a continued series of knowing your work area, let me just close in on few of the remaining residual issues. If I go to Visual Basic window, how do I test a certain code once I've written so? So let me double click on the heading of this Microsoft Visual Basic for Application window, minimize this. Now there are various methods through which users, developers test their code, and I'll illustrate some of them, some of the popular ones. For example, this is a very simple code which selects the cell A2 and creates a list of all the worksheet names along with the hyperlink. Now, how do I know it's going to work? Well, let me do one thing. Let me place my cursor at the beginning of the statement of this sub procedure or a macro beginning. Now, I'm going to press the shortcut key F8. Now, what is F8 function key going to do? It's going to run the code one line at a time. Notice how it toggles to that action of selecting A2. Then it says for each sheet in this active workbook, please apply the sheet name in one of the cells, fill it up, and then do also apply a hyperlink inside them. So notice it toggles one by one, and on the left hand side how the cursor selection is moving. Yes, so the function key F8 key allows you to quickly toggle through the various statements and see what they perform. Let me do one thing. Let me reset the entire code so that it stops midway. The second way through which people, users, developers test the code is using this particular run sub user form. So run a sub procedure or user form. Now when I click on this, notice it runs the code entirely at one go. It doesn't stop midway. So F8 function key allows you to see the codes affect one line at a time, whereas the function key F5 runs the code at what? In an instant. Now those are the two methods through which people do test the code. Alternatively, sometimes what happens, you wish to just test one part of the code. So what I might do is I place my cursor here at the beginning of the statement. I press F8 function key. Now I can hold on to this yellow arrow and bring it at the line item which straight away says please create those names of the worksheet with hyperlink. Notice I have skipped the entire line item which says please select A2. Now if I continue to press F8, let's see what's going to happen. Notice the names of the worksheet are appearing from the 12th and the 13th row onwards. Well, that's because I just broke the sequence and moved the yellow arrow and started midway. So this is another way whereby you don't want to test the entire piece of code, just one small piece of code, just to see whether it is doing what it is meant to do. So there are three options, F5, F8 and using this toggle point arrow. Well, if you are going to run a long list of codes, at times you will have to test the variable and how are they calculating the logics that you have tried to incorporate. So one of the tools available to you is immediate window. Now where is that? If you go to the Visual Basic Editor right on top and you go to the View menu, you'll be able to see immediate window. You can also activate this by pressing Ctrl G. I click on it, and at the bottom right section I have this immediate window popping up. Now how is this used? What is the utility? Let me explain. If I begin the code and I start pressing F8, a shortcut key which allows you to run the code one line at a time. Now this yellow marker indicates the next line of code will be run is the one which is highlighted. So it's not been run yet, x equal to 10, but when I press F8, it will be. So at this moment, the current value of x equal to what? 10. And if I run this line of code, 10 multiplied with 10 will be the reassigned value of x, thus making it 100. Now at this juncture, before this line of code is run, let me reassign the value of x equal to, let's say, 8, and I press enter. Now what just happened was, without changing the code, without changing the internal logics, I have been able to reassign x to the value of 8. Now if I run the code by pressing F8, and thereafter if I try to find out what is the revised value of x, so I'm not pressing enter in the immediate window. In fact, I'm just putting my cursor at the line below the first one and putting question x, enter. Notice it is 8 multiplied with 8, that is 64. Now this allows you to test the code without actually changing the variables of the code itself. Because if you try to change the variable somewhere down the line, you may forget to undo that and your entire code might be corrupted in logics. Other than assigning values and trying to find what a variable's value is, I can also use regular commands. For example, I can put question mark and I can write worksheets.count, enter. It gives me there's only one worksheet in this active workbook. Okay, let's take one more example. What if I put question mark and write range within double quote A1, double quote close, bracket close, dot value. Since I've put a question mark and trying to ask the immediate window what is the current value of A1, it does give me the answer 12. So at a very basic level, immediate window helps you reassign the value to a variable, check out what is the current value of variable, and also help you ask a lot of questions without exiting this immediate window. So see more of it as we go along. Now, in this session, let's learn about one of the most important objects in VBA, and that is a range object. Now, what is a range object? Typically, any cell that we select, it is defined by an address which we see in the name box. It's called B2 in this case, C2 in this case. And if we happen to choose a group of cells, something like this, it's a range defined by the starting point being C2 and the ending point being D5. Now, all these are examples of range. Most often than not, since your data is stored in these cells, in ranges of different worksheet, which you want to manipulate, cut, copy, paste, shift it to another cells, and this is the prime reason why range object is so important. Because unless you know how to work with it, you cannot manipulate the way they are going to be treated by you in a very customized manner. So let's see how we progress on the learning path on this range object. First, let me do a small experiment. What I'm going to ask you to do is go to developer, right? Click on record macro, and I'm just saying the word select1 as the name of the macro, and which has been stored in this workbook, so that I can store this in this workbook and save it for later use. Also maybe transfer this to you, you can make use of it. Now when I press OK, I'm going to choose a group of cells, and that's what I've done. And simply turning the color into yellow. Now once I do that, let me go to developer and then let me say stop recording. I'm so curious to see what the code has been written in the background by the Visual Basic Editor once I started recording the macro. Let me go to macros button. I see the name select1 appearing. Let me click on edit. Alternatively, I could have gone to Visual Basic and I would have seen that this is the file name on which we are working, within which contains one module or with the container or the storage area for this macro. Now, as we know from our previous basic discussion, every macro has the head and the tail. I can see that. And so I can see is a couple of statements which have been commentified. Do I need this? No. The first line that we had worst action rather that we had done was choosing a particular range. So what has happened is there is a range that has been selected and the action says please select it. Now with that selection, do what? With the selection, the interiors, please change the color to a certain value which has been specified as 65535. That's the number for yellow. Did we talk about anything other than the color? No, but Excel by default gives these default settings turn to null or default value. Now, if we were to write the same thing using the coding process, how would we have done? So let me do one thing. Let me go inside this particular project, which is a workbook name, and insert a different module so that we can work simultaneously with the next macro. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this name sub select to bracket open close, that's a parenthesis pair, press enter, automatically the tail of the macro comes up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use all the shortcuts that we had discussed earlier. So I'm pressing RANGE. Notice as I press dot, IntelliSense comes to my help, giving me all the properties and methods that I possibly can apply with this range object. So as I start typing in S, it gives me select. Now select, that's the method. Let me click on it, and what it does is range.select. Now you notice I have made a committed an error. Why? Let me start running this and let's see what happens. So I'm going to click on the start of the macro and click on run. Compile error. Why is that? Because after range I did not specify the value. Now what could have helped me specify the value? If you press Ctrl I, that's the shortcut key that will give the different parameters associated with it. So I'm going to open the bracket. It asks me what cell that I want to choose. I'm going to put that in double quotation A1 colon and let's say B2, double quotation closed and bracket closed. Now I'm going to press dot and the IntelliSense now tells me what exactly needs to be done with this range. So I'm going to again go to select, press the tab key, and that's about it. Let me click on reset the entire macro and then run that again. Notice A1 to B2 has been chosen. So this is one way of specifying the range. Now, as a continued series of this range object, let's see other ways to select a particular range. Now, the last time we had seen how a range can be defined like this and selected. Let me commentify this. Let me look for that particular window which lets me commentify. Yeah. Now, there is an object which says cells and it helps me specify what row number and column number intersection is the cell I wish to refer to. So cells 1, 2 reflect row 1, which is this one, column number 2, and the intersection is what? B1. What I wish to do with that is select. Since I had not given that method, it gave me that error. So if I now run the particular macro, let's see what's going to happen. Notice the intersection of row 1 and column 2 happens to be the cell B1, and that's what has been selected. Similarly, let me manipulate this to, let's say, 2. So row number 2, column number 2 refers to what? B2. Let me run the macro again. Alright, this is choosing B2. So this is another way of choosing a particular cell or a range. Now, how about combining both of them? Well, at times what happens when you wish to give variables so that the row and the column number references change, in which case you would want to combine the range and cells object. So range, I press Ctrl I, it allows me to see what's there I need to put in, that is a bracket open. Now within which I'm going to put cells, open bracket, close bracket. I'm going to come back to this particular parameter and value, but till then let me add one more cells, close the parenthesis. Now notice it is asking for the starting point just like A1 and the ending point. Now how would you define A1? Which row, which column number intersection? Row 1, column 1, right? Similarly, how do you define B1? It is row 1, column number 2, right? Now once this range has been selected, I may later want to manipulate by copying and pasting to a different worksheet. So at this moment, I just wish to check whether what I've written is selecting the A1 and B2 both together. Let me put my cursor beginning and click on this run. Notice A1 and B1 has been chosen. So besides the other two ways and approaches to select cell or ranges, I have one more combination which is going to be extremely beneficial, especially when you wish to run a certain activity in loop. And once A1, B1 has been selected, the next action should happen on the cells below and below and below until a certain point in time. And that's where the combination of loop, variable, declaration and the current method of choosing a range will help us. To do make sure that you do experiment with at least these three ways of choosing the range. There are many more, but I'll stick to this one at this moment because I don't want to burden you with lots of codes, half of which may not be relevant at this point in time. Now, with all the combined knowledge that we've had looking at all these videos in the past, let's do a very small project. And let me explain what the steps are going to be. Now, in column A, I have 6 months listed out, Jan to June. And what I want is through a simple macro, which loops through, and that should delete the second, the fourth and the sixth item, all even. Now how do I do that based on the knowledge we have had and plus some extra knowledge which I'm going to get into more detail as we progress in the course. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to developer, I'm going to go to Visual Basic. Alright, now if you ever want to toggle between the Excel window and the Visual Basic window, a very important shortcut key is Alt F11. I repeat, it is Alt F11. If you press that, notice how quickly you are able to toggle. Right, so let me do one thing. Let me now place all the window correctly, Alt F11. Now what I wish to do is write a sub procedure. So sub, and this is a delete even items, bracket open close and enter. Now let me just ensure that the first letter of every unique word is capitalized. It helps in looking at the name of the macro very easily when you are going to run it. So delete even items. Now as I press enter, now what I wish to do is select the alternate cell starting from second, then the fourth and then the sixth, right? So how do you select the cells? And I'm going to say row number 1, oh no, it's row number 2 and column number 1 which needs to be selected, right? And then I say equal to what? Equal to nothing. Let me copy paste this 3 times. And in all these cases, I'm going to say row number 4, row number 6. Let me see what happens if I run this particular macro. Now I'm going to press F8, that's the shortcut key to make sure the command line is run one at a time. F8. Once this macro is run, notice the February has gone away, right? Now, as I hover my cursor on this selection, notice what is going to happen, F8, and that's the end of the procedure. Now the same thing I could have written with a help of a loop and a variable. Although I'll be discussing this concept a little later, but I'll just quickly show you how does it ultimately appear. What is the big picture? Let me retain all the values back, Jan to June. I'm going to commentify this part, right? And then let me start writing the same thing again. In fact, let me just copy this for the time being. Now notice, if somehow can I get a mechanism by which this variable changes to 2, 4 and then 6 and then stops the entire procedure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a variable called I. Now the starting value of I should be 2 because I want a sequence of 2, 4, 6. Now there are concepts like declaring a variable, those are good practices. In detail I'll discuss them later. Now I is equal to 2, agreed. And currently since it is 2, that 2, 1 refers to which cell? Row 2 column 1, that refers to February. Now there should be someone to tell this macro that once you have covered the second row, please jump to the fourth row. So there is a command which will say please reassign the value of I is equal to I plus 2. So that once it has taken the value of 2, next time it will take the value of 4 and next time it's taking the value of 6. Now, you don't want to repeat that endlessly. Nor do you want to just make it happen once. You want it to happen 3 times, right? So, what I wish to do is I'm going to put this entire piece of action in a loop. Now, loop is something, again, it's very important, but I'll just show an overview how this is portrayed. So, do while I is less than 7. And loop also has a head and a tail. So this was the head which specify the condition, and the tail is loop, the word loop. So do while I is less than 7 till the time I has the value less than 7. Please do this task again. So let me test this, how it's going to look like. I'm going to press F8. Yeah, F8. Now I'm going to press F8 again. So what is the current value of I? I is the value 2, as you can see from the key tip. Now I is the value 2, so 2 and 1 are 2C1, which refers to blank. Delete them. Reassign the value of I, and once the value has been reassigned, notice what is the value of I? It is now 4 from the key tip. Let me rerun that again. What is the revised value of I? Let's find out. I is 6. Is 6 less than 7? Yes. That means continue running the macro. Now once the I has been reassigned the value of 6 plus 2, that is 8. Is 8 less than 7? No. Hence, the entire loop has been superseded and then straight away to the tail of the macro. So this is a very simple use of the variable and the loop, and that's the reason I focused on the range object, especially the cells one, which allows you to put variables inside its parameter and which can be manipulated and looped through. We'll see more of it as the action intensifies. Now, since we are already discussing about the range object in terms of selecting the specified ranges, let me also specify the two lines of code which helps you select a particular set of rows or columns. Now before us lies one item which says rows in double quotation 5:7 double quotation close dot select, and similarly for column where you can specify the start and the end of the range. So let me test this one by one. The first code, let me execute it. Let's see what happens. Notice row number 5 till 7 selected. Similarly, I'm going to commentify that and remove the comment from the next one. And let me rerun the code again. Notice column B till E has been chosen. Yeah. So these are the two ways I can also choose rows and columns apart from the other methods and properties that we saw earlier. Now, let's experiment with some more examples of range object and how can we manipulate the selected cells with a certain number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose this particular project and insert a new module, right? And this time let me give a name, sub. The idea is to select cells, right? Open the bracket, close the bracket, the parenthesis complete, enter. Now if I specify range dot, it gives me of course lot of values of methods, but before that let me specify what is the range that I want to select, right? Sometimes initially when you're starting with VBA, this is the point where you will make most of the time the mistake of not being specifying the range. So here I put a double quote and select A1 colon C3 double quotation closed brackets closed dot. Do you want to put a value against it or do you want to say selected? At this moment let me try if I simply can say equal to 12. And if I press enter, at this moment it doesn't show me a red text. So let me run this macro and see what it does. Yep. Instantly all the selected cells amongst the ranges turns to 2. Now the same thing, let me copy it and paste it twice. And the first one I'm going to put a comment against, and this range I'm going to put a dot, and let me see if I can get a particular property, let's say value. And is it 12? Let me rerun the macro. It does the same thing again. Let me just change the value to 121 just to differentiate, and let me run the macro again. Right. So sometimes by default it catches the value, sometimes you'll have to specify this. Of course it's a good idea, good practice to specify exactly which property you want to change and what method do you want to apply. So this was a very simple and basic examples how can you put values against the selected range. Now after having written some very basic code regarding range object and how to manipulate cells, let me show you a way through which you should actually test your macro. A lot of people refer this as a debugging of the code as well. Let me show you what this refers to. Let's say for example I have manipulated the cell A1 only to a value of 121, and simultaneously thereafter I'm going to copy this particular part, paste it below, and then I'm going to remove the comment single quote and change the value to 12. Now ideally the first value that should change is the A1 121, and thereafter all the remaining values should again be superseded and then renamed 12. So let me delete one thing, this one, go back to my Visual Basic window, right? And then let me select the first line of the macro code. Let me press F8. It gives that yellow selection. All right, let me again press F8. It allows you to run the code one at a time. Now as I press F8, notice it has entered 121, right? Now currently it is about to supersede all the range values with 12, so which I'm going to say F8 again. Notice now it supersedes the existing value of A1 to C3 by 12. Notice my initial selection was more, but that doesn't affect the macro which specify the value that should change is A1 to C3 and not A1 to C4. So that's about simple technique of how can you test your macro. So after that last task, I am going to ask you the second question. After looking at the code which you find on my screen, what do you think this macro is going to do? It's going to, yes, select the cell A1 and put what? A text string, and that's the reason you will notice the text string has been given in a pair of double quotation. And after which, the next cell below that it's going to turn into 1. Let me put my cursor before the beginning of macro and run it. Yes, as you can see, serial number, and that's the digit 1 below that. So do remember, whenever you add text string to a particular value, you must put that double quotation, unlike a number which may or may not require that double quotation to put therein. Now this time I have a mini task for you with respect to range selection and manipulation. Well, the task is, using a single line of command within the head and tail of a macro, please make sure all the values which you now see on my screen are turned to 14. Now if you use a traditional method, you would have surely gone to range, bracket open, double quotation open, you would have said A1 colon, and that you would have specified the end of the range, which is what, C3, double quotation close, bracket close, and equal to 14. Now what you would have done is, you would have certainly copy pasted this below and changed the value, let's say in this case E4. Is it E4? Yes, it is E4, E4 till E7. Alright, E7. Now idea is, both these lines will together accomplish the task that you have set to achieve. But my wish is that you turn this into one single line of code. So what else can we do? Let me just put a comment in here, and I'm going to write the same thing, but this time with a twist which allows me to manipulate different ranges in a single command. So notice, within the double quotation, I am copying the range E4 to E7 and putting a comma and then pasting it. Now what this does is, these is A union B, which means what? This and this both are part of the same range, and that is going to turn to 14. So let me do one thing, let me just change the value to, let's say, 17, just to test, and I'm going to run this macro. Boom, all turning to 17. So this is one way through which you can select different scattered ranges in one single command and turn into a value or a formula, which later we'll see, and that too in a single statement. That's fast. So ensure that you complete this task before we move on to the next one. Now this time let me show you how to use range object with defined names, named ranges, and how to manipulate through the various numbers. Now let's assume that I'm going to choose a group of cells, let's say A1 to A4, and give a name, something like data, and enter. Now once you press enter, henceforth this entire range will be known as the data, and once you choose that, it will directly take you there. Now if I can quickly go to Visual Basic, add a module, insert module, and let me give this name sub testing named ranges. Alright, opening and closing the bracket. Instantly as I press enter, the tail of the macro comes up. Now I say range within parenthesis pair double quotation, and then I put the data, the name of the range that I had given. Double quotation closed. Oops, I pressed enter by mistake. Let me now close the parenthesis and say equal to 1 to 1. Enter. Now let me run this macro and see what's happened. Let me first, in an effective manner, let me not choose the same range just to test whether my action of the macro is performing well. And then let me go to the window and click on run. Alright, so all the range which was named data has been manipulated one to one. So now let me do one thing. Let me go to formula and name manager, and once I'm inside there, let me change the references of the name data. I go to edit, the name remains same, but I'm just going to increase the selection to, let's say, 10. So from A1 to A10. Now when I run the macro, let's see what happens. So I go to developer, I go to macros, and I go to this macro which says testing named ranges and say run, right? That's a very important technique when you are going to combine this small technique with a bigger set of macros later point in time. Why? Because with a certain logic, the name range reference might change, maybe more, maybe less, and based on that the action will be performed. So you would not have to interfere within the action of specifying the range manually. We'll see. In this video session, we'll see how to choose selection or ranges. Other than that, the methods that we have seen already, and how to change the properties at a very basic level. So for example, if your event says whatever the active cell right now, I would want to change that to the color yellow. Okay, so the code for that is active cell dot interior. I'm going to use the interior from the drop down of IntelliSense, press tab key, dot color, and pressing tab key. So active cell, whichever is the cell which has been chosen already, if I say equal to 65535 and press enter, and let me now test this code from the beginning. Notice it quickly colors the cells which has been the active cell. Now, on the contrary, sometimes you would want to choose a range of cell before you run the macro, and as you run the macro, the entire selection should be colored off, right? So what do? I'm simply copying the secondary part of this code, and then I'm writing this code saying selection. Now, selection refers to the entire gamut of cells that you have selected, and then I paste the secondary part of the code with a dot in between, and let's see what this does. Let me run the code. Aha, entire selection got colored. So besides this, what if I wish to ensure that the entire sheet is selected and colored yellow? Well, before you do that, that one more line of code that you need to write, that is cells dot select. So the first line of code says the entire group of cells in the sheet will be selected, and since it's selected, the next line of code suggests that selection, please make it color 65535, which is the code for yellow. Let me test this out. Whoa. So this works fine for all of us, and this is how you may also alternatively choose the selection or cells and change the property for them.